For 6 months, Detective Jackson Pope watched his wife Rosemary leave their house every night at 9:47 p.m., telling him she was meeting her coworker Sarah to work on a big project. 6 months of the same excuse. 6 months of her coming home at 2 a.m., smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't Sarah's perfume. 6 months of her phone lighting up with messages she'd quickly hide. And Jackson, a private investigator who'd caught hundreds of cheating spouses red-handed, told himself he was being paranoid. He told himself to trust his wife. He told himself that the woman he'd loved for 8 years wouldn't do this to him. But tonight, as he watched her apply lipstick in the hallway mirror, that deep red shade she only wore for special occasions, something inside him finally broke. Because Jackson had done something he swore he'd never do. He'd followed her last Tuesday. And what he discovered at that downtown address wasn't just an affair. It was so much worse than he could have ever imagined, and it was about to unravel everything he thought he knew about the woman sleeping next to him every night for the past years. But before we continue with this beautiful story, please kindly subscribe to this channel and comment where you are watching from, and also share below. What life or relationship challenge are you facing right now? Or what someone you know is going through? Don't forget to like this video as well. All these mean a lot to us. Jackson stood in the darkness of their bedroom, watching Rosemary's reflection in the vanity mirror. She didn't know he was there yet. She was too focused on perfecting her appearance, running her fingers through her honey blonde hair, adjusting the neckline of that black dress. The one she'd told him last month was just something I threw on for girls' night. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Rosemary jumped, her hand flying to her chest. "Jackson, you scared me. I didn't hear you come in." "I noticed." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Big project tonight?" "You know it." She turned back to the mirror, avoiding his eyes. "Sarah's really stressing about the deadline. I told you about it, remember?" "Right. Sarah." He let the name hang in the air between them. "Must be some project if it requires meeting at almost 10 at night. For 6 months straight." Rosemary's hand stilled on her lipstick, just for a second, but Jackson caught it. 13 years as a private investigator had taught him to notice the micro-expressions, the tiny tells that people couldn't control. "It's a complicated account," she said, her voice too casual. "You know how demanding my job can be." "I do know." Jackson pushed off the doorframe, moving closer. "I also know that Sarah Rodriguez quit your company 4 months ago. I called your office today, spoke to Janet in HR. Nice lady." The color drained from Rosemary's face. She turned slowly, lipstick frozen in her hand. You checked up on me?" "I'm a private investigator, Rosemary. It's literally what I do." He kept his voice steady, controlled. "So let's try this again. Where are you really going every night?" Rosemary's mouth opened, closed. Her eyes darted to the door, calculating. Jackson had seen that look before, on the faces of guilty spouses trying to decide whether to run, lie, or confess. "It's not what you think," she finally said. "Then tell me what it is." "I can't." Those 2 words hit him harder than any confession would have. "You can't, or you won't." "Jackson, please." Rosemary set down the lipstick with shaking hands. "Just trust me. I need you to trust me for a little while longer." "Trust you?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've been lying to me for 6 months. You're dressed like you're going on a date. You come home at 2 in the morning, and I'm supposed to just trust you?" "Yes," her voice cracked. "Yes, because I'm asking you to. Because in 8 years of marriage, I've never asked you for anything like this. Because I love you, and I need you to believe that." Jackson studied her face. The tears gathering in her green eyes looked real. The trembling in her voice sounded genuine. But he'd learned the hard way that people could fake anything when they had enough at stake. "Show me your phone," he said. "What?" "Your phone, Rosemary. Show it to me. Right now." She backed away, her hand instinctively moving to her purse. That's an invasion of privacy." "We're married. We don't have privacy from each other." He held out his hand. "Unless you're hiding something." Rosemary stared at him for a long moment. Something flickered across her face. Guilt? Fear? He couldn't read it, and that terrified him more than anything. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Then she grabbed her purse and ran. Jackson stood there, frozen in disbelief as her footsteps thundered down the stairs. The front door slammed. Her car engine roared to life. And then she was gone, leaving him alone in their bedroom with the scent of her perfume and the ruins of his marriage. He sank onto the bed, his head in his hands. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. He'd planned to confront her calmly, rationally, get the truth, figure out how to fix this. Instead, she'd run, which meant she was definitely hiding something. Jackson looked at the clock, 9:53 p.m. She was late for wherever she was really going. He pulled out his phone and opened the tracking app he'd secretly installed on her car last week. Another thing he'd sworn he'd never do to his own wife. But desperate times called for desperate measures. The red dot was moving fast, heading downtown, toward the same address she'd gone to last Tuesday, the same address where Jackson had parked across the street in his surveillance van, camera ready to document evidence for the divorce he didn't want but might need. Last Tuesday, he'd watched her pull up to a luxury apartment building, watched her key in an access code like she'd done it 100 times, watched her disappear inside for 3 hours. He'd been ready to storm in there, confront her and whatever man she was meeting. But something had stopped him. Maybe cowardice. Maybe the last shred of hope that there was an explanation. Tonight, that hope was dead. Jackson grabbed his keys and headed for his car. If Rosemary wouldn't tell him the truth, he'd find it himself. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. Traffic was light for a Thursday night. Jackson kept his eyes on the tracking app, watching Rosemary's dot stop at the same building. She was already inside by the time he pulled into his surveillance spot across the street. The building was nice. Too nice. 30 stories of glass and steel, the kind of place that cost $5,000 a month minimum. Rosemary made good money as a marketing manager, but not this kind of money, which meant someone was paying for it. Someone who wanted to keep her comfortable and close. Jackson's jaw clenched. He'd seen this pattern before. Married woman, secret apartment, lies upon lies. It always ended the same way. He pulled out his camera with the telephoto lens and aimed it at the building. Floor 15, third window from the left. That's where she'd gone last Tuesday. The lights were already on. If you're enjoying this story so far, pause and comment, "I am enjoying this story" below. Then something unexpected happened. Another car pulled up to the building. A black Mercedes that Jackson recognized immediately because he'd helped his brother Tom pick it out 3 years ago. Jackson's blood went cold. No, it couldn't be. But Tom stepped out of the Mercedes, looked around nervously, and hurried into the building, using the same keypad code Rosemary had used, moving like someone who'd done this before. The camera fell from Jackson's hands. His wife, his brother, meeting in a secret apartment for 6 months. Every confrontation he'd ever watched through a camera lens, every tearful confession he'd recorded, every marriage he'd helped destroy with evidence, suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. Because now he was on the other side of the lens. Now he was the husband sitting in a dark car, watching his entire world collapse. Jackson's hands shook as he picked up the camera. Years of professional detachment crumbled. This wasn't a case. This was his life. This was Rosemary, who'd laughed at his terrible jokes and held him through his father's funeral. This was Tom, who'd been his best man and godfather to the kids they'd talked about having. How long had they been planning this? Had they laughed about him behind his back? Had every family dinner been a lie? The lights in the 15th floor apartment suddenly went off. Jackson waited, his heart hammered against his ribs. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool October air. 10 minutes passed, 15, 20. Then the building's front door opened. But instead of Rosemary and Tom, a group of people emerged. 6, 7, 8 people. Jackson grabbed his camera and zoomed in. Rosemary was there, in her black dress. Tom was beside her. But so were 5 other people Jackson didn't recognize. They were all dressed formally, carrying briefcases and folders. They looked serious, professional, and they weren't touching each other, not holding hands, not even standing particularly close. Rosemary pulled out her phone, typed something, then showed the screen to the group. They nodded. A few took photos of whatever she was showing them. Then they split up, heading to different cars. Rosemary and Tom didn't even say goodbye to each other. They got into their separate cars and drove away in opposite directions. Jackson sat there in confusion, his camera dangling from his neck. That wasn't how affairs worked. That wasn't how guilty people acted. His phone buzzed. A text from Rosemary. "I'm sorry I ran. I'm sorry I can't explain yet, but I promise you, I promise on everything we have together, this isn't what you think it is. Please don't follow me. Please just go home and wait. 2 more weeks. I just need 2 more weeks and then I can tell you everything. I love you. I have always loved you." 2 more weeks? For what? Jackson stared at the message, his investigator's mind racing. The formal dress, the group meeting, the briefcases, Rosemary's desperation for him to trust her, Tom's nervous behavior. This wasn't an affair. Something else was happening. Something they were both involved in. Something they were hiding from him. But what? Jackson zoomed in on the building's entrance with his camera and took several photos. He'd run the address in the morning, check property records, see who owned that apartment and why his wife and brother needed to meet there in secret. Because Jackson Pope was a lot of things. A husband, a brother, a fool for believing in his marriage. But he was also one of the best private investigators in the city, and he was about to investigate the hell out of his own life. Jackson didn't sleep that night. How could he, when his wife was lying next to him pretending everything was normal? Rosemary had come home at 2:15 a.m., slipped into bed, and whispered, "I love you," like she did every night. Like she hadn't just run away from him. Like she wasn't keeping secrets that involved his own brother. Jackson kept his eyes closed and his breathing steady, playing the part of the sleeping husband while his mind raced with possibilities. At 6 a.m., Rosemary's alarm went off. She kissed his forehead, got ready for work, and left by 7:30. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, Jackson was at his computer. He'd spent 13 years tracking down cheaters, fraudsters, and liars. Now he was going to use every skill he had to uncover what his wife was really doing. And he was starting with that apartment building. The property records came up within 20 minutes. The apartment on the 15th floor was registered to a shell company called Meridian Holdings, LLC. Dead end. Shell companies were designed to hide ownership, but Jackson knew how to dig deeper. He cross-referenced Meridian Holdings with business registrations, tax filings, and corporate databases. 3 hours later, he found a connection. Meridian Holdings had been established 6 months ago, right when Rosemary's late-night project meetings had started. The registered agent was a lawyer named Patricia Kim. Jackson knew that name. Patricia Kim was one of the best corporate attorneys in the state. She handled major business deals, acquisitions, intellectual property cases. Not the kind of lawyer you hired for anything small. What was Rosemary involved in that required that level of legal representation? He pulled up Rosemary's bank statements next, another thing he'd sworn he'd never do. But that promise felt hollow now, buried under 6 months of lies. The statements showed regular deposits from her job at Sterling Marketing Group, nothing unusual there. But there were also regular withdrawals, $500 every Friday like clockwork, always from the same ATM downtown, near that apartment building. Jackson zoomed in on the transactions. The timing matched perfectly with her Thursday night meetings. She'd withdraw the cash Friday morning, probably on her lunch break. $500 a week for 6 months. That was nearly $13,000. What was she paying for? Or who was she paying? His phone rang. Tom's name lit up the screen. Jackson stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Yeah? Hey man, just checking in." Tom's voice was casual. Too casual. "You okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine. Listen, I know we haven't hung out in a while. Been busy with work stuff, but we should grab lunch next week. Catch up." Work stuff. Was that what they were calling it now? "Sure," Jackson said, keeping his voice neutral. "What kind of work stuff has you so busy?" A pause. "Just, the usual. Accounts, clients, boring business crap. Nothing interesting." Tom was lying. Jackson could hear it in the slight uptick at the end of his sentences, the way he filled silence with unnecessary words. "How's Rachel doing?" Jackson asked, referring to Tom's wife of 6 years. "She's good. Great, actually. Been really supportive with all the late nights I've been pulling. Late nights. At the same apartment where Rosemary was spending her late nights. "That's good," Jackson said. "She's a keeper." "Yeah, she is." Tom sounded relieved. "So, lunch next week?" "I'll text you." Jackson hung up before Tom could respond. His hands were shaking, not with anger anymore, with fear. Because whatever was happening, it was big enough that Tom was lying to his own brother. Big enough that Rosemary had begged for 2 more weeks. Big enough to risk everything. Jackson pulled up his brother's financial records next. He had access to them from 3 years ago when Tom had asked him to do a background check on a potential business partner. Tom had never changed his passwords. The same pattern was there. Regular withdrawals of $500 every Friday. Same ATM. Same timing. Rosemary and Tom were both funding something together. Jackson sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. Not an affair, a partnership. But for what? He opened Rosemary's laptop next. She'd left it on the kitchen counter that morning in her rush to get to work. Her password was their anniversary date. She'd never hidden it from him before. The laptop unlocked. Jackson felt like a traitor going through her files, but he pushed past the guilt. She'd lied to him for 6 months. She'd forfeited her right to privacy. Most of her files were work-related. Marketing presentations, client proposals, budget spreadsheets. But there was one folder titled SG Project, buried in her documents. Jackson opened it. Inside were dozens of files, business plans, financial projections, patent applications, legal documents, and photos. Lots of photos. Photos of a product, some kind of device. It looked like a sophisticated home security system, but smaller, sleeker, more advanced than anything Jackson had seen on the market. He opened a business plan document dated 4 months ago. The header read, Safeguard Technologies, Revolutionary Home Security AI System. Jackson started reading. His eyes widened with each paragraph. Rosemary and Tom hadn't been having an affair. They'd been building a company, a security company, using Jackson's own expertise and ideas that he'd talked about for years over family dinners. Ideas about how home security systems could be smarter, more intuitive. How they could use AI to predict threats instead of just recording them. How they could integrate with smart homes to actually prevent break-ins before they happened. Jackson had pitched these ideas to his boss at the detective agency 2 years ago. His boss had laughed him off, said they were too expensive, too complicated, too risky. So Rosemary and Tom had decided to build it themselves, in secret. The business plan outlined everything. Rosemary had brought her marketing expertise and industry connections. Tom, who worked in software development, had brought his technical skills. Together, they'd been developing a prototype, filing patents, and preparing to launch a startup. A startup worth potentially millions if they could get it to market. If you're enjoying this story so far, pause and comment, "I am enjoying this story," below. Jackson kept reading, his emotions churning between betrayal and something else, something he couldn't quite name. They'd used his ideas, his vision, his years of experience in security and investigation, but they hadn't included him, hadn't even told him. Why? He found his answer in an email exchange between Rosemary and Patricia Kim, the lawyer. Rosemary had written, "We still haven't told Jackson. I know it's getting harder to hide the meetings, but after what happened with his dad's business, I'm terrified of how he'll react. He's so risk-averse now, so afraid of failure. I can't tell him until we have secured funding and prove this will work. I can't watch him talk me out of this dream like he talks himself out of everything." Jackson felt like he'd been punched in the gut. His father had lost everything in a failed business venture when Jackson was 20. They'd lost their house, their savings, everything. It had destroyed his dad, left him broken and defeated until the day he died. Jackson had sworn he'd never take those kinds of risks. He'd chosen a stable career, a steady paycheck. He'd talked Rosemary out of quitting her corporate job twice when she'd wanted to start her own marketing firm. She was right. He would have talked her out of this. He would have listed every reason it could fail, every way they could lose money, every risk they couldn't afford to take. So she'd cut him out, lied to him for 6 months, built this dream in secret with his brother because she knew her own husband would kill it before it had a chance to live. Jackson closed the laptop, his throat tight. Was he angry? Hurt? Relieved? All of it crashed over him at once. His phone buzzed again. Rosemary this time. Working late again tonight. Another meeting. I'm sorry. I know you don't believe me, but I really am sorry. Just please hold on a little longer. He stared at the message. She didn't know that he knew. She was still protecting the secret, still keeping him in the dark. Jackson looked at the business plan on the laptop screen, at his wife's dream laid out in careful detail, at the months of work she'd poured into this while he'd been suspecting her of the worst betrayal possible. Part of him wanted to confront her immediately, demand to know why she didn't trust him enough to share this, why she thought she needed to protect him from his own ideas. But another part of him, the investigator who'd learned patience, knew there was more to uncover. The business plan was only 4 months old, but Rosemary's meetings had been happening for 6 months. What had they been doing for those first 2 months before the company was officially formed? Jackson dug deeper into the files, found older documents, meeting notes from 6 months ago, right when everything had started. The first meeting notes weren't about business at all. They were about Jackson. M has been depressed for 3 months since the Caldwell case, Rosemary had written. Won't talk to me about it. Keeps saying he's fine, but I know he's not. He's drinking more, sleeping less. I'm worried about him. Tom agrees we need to do something. M's always talked about doing more with security work, making a real difference. Maybe if we could surprise him with this, show him it's possible to take risks and succeed, it would help him heal. Jackson stopped breathing. The Caldwell case. He'd tried so hard to forget about it. 3 months before Rosemary's meeting started, Jackson had been hired to investigate a suspected child abduction. He'd worked around the clock, following every lead, and he'd been wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. The abducted child had been with her non-custodial mother the whole time, caught in an ugly divorce. But by the time Jackson had figured it out, his bad intel had led to a violent confrontation. The father had been hurt, the mother arrested, the child traumatized. No one had blamed Jackson officially, but he'd blamed himself. He'd spiraled into depression, questioning everything about his career, his abilities, his worth. Rosemary had tried to help. He'd shut her out, told her he was fine when he clearly wasn't. So she decided to help him in the only way she knew how, by building something that proved his ideas had value, that proved he could make a difference, that proved failure wasn't the end of everything. She'd been trying to save him, and he'd suspected her of cheating. Jackson felt tears burning his eyes. He roughly wiped them away. But that didn't excuse the lies. That didn't excuse cutting him out of his own dream, his own ideas. That didn't excuse 6 months of deception, did it? He spent the rest of the day investigating, not his wife anymore, but the company she'd built, Safeguard Technologies. What he found impressed him. The prototype was actually functional. They'd lined up 3 potential investors for meetings next week, major players in the tech security space. They'd filed patents that would protect the intellectual property. They'd done everything right. Rosemary and Tom had put in $13,000 each, $26,000 total. Their entire savings, based on their bank records. If the investors said no next week, they'd lose everything. No wonder Rosemary had begged for 2 more weeks. The investor meetings were in 12 days. If they went well, Safeguard Technologies would get Series A funding and officially launch. If they went badly, all of this would collapse and she'd have to confess to Jackson that she'd gambled their financial future on a dream he would have told her to abandon. Jackson looked at the clock. 8:47 p.m. Rosemary would be leaving for her meeting in an hour. The final prototype demonstration before the investor pitches. He could confront her now, demand explanations, make this about his hurt feelings and her lies. Or he could do something else, something she'd never expect. Jackson grabbed his keys and headed for the door. He knew exactly where that apartment was, knew exactly what time everyone would be there. And he knew that after 13 years of catching people in their lies, it was time for him to show up with a truth of his own. The drive downtown felt longer than usual. Jackson rehearsed what he wanted to say a dozen times. discarded every version. How did you confront the person who'd lied to you, but only because she was trying to help you? How did you express hurt when you understood the reason behind it? He pulled up to the apartment building at 9:45 p.m. Rosemary's car was already there. So was Tom's, and 3 others he didn't recognize. Jackson took the elevator to the 15th floor. His heart hammered. His hands were steady, but inside he was shaking. He reached apartment 1507, raised his fist to knock, then stopped. Through the door, he could hear Rosemary's voice. She was giving a presentation. He could hear the confidence in her tone, the passion she put into every word. She was describing how the safeguard system could prevent break-ins, protect families, save lives. She was describing his dream, the one he'd given up on. Jackson stood there in the hallway, listening to his wife bring his ideas to life while he'd spent 6 months suspecting her of betrayal. And suddenly he knew exactly what he needed to do. But as he reached for the door handle, it swung open from inside. Tom stood there, his face going pale when he saw Jackson. Behind him, Rosemary's voice cut off mid-sentence. Jackson heard her sharp intake of breath, heard chairs scraping back, heard the sudden silence of a room full of people realizing everything was about to change. Rosemary appeared behind Tom in the doorway, her face drained of color. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Jackson could see past them into the apartment, where 5 other people sat around a conference table covered with laptops, documents, and a sleek black device he recognized from the photos. His security system, his dream, built without him. The device's small LED pulsed with blue light, like a heartbeat, and Jackson felt his own heart matching its rhythm. Rosemary's hand flew to her mouth, her green eyes wide with panic, and something else Jackson couldn't quite read. Was it shame, fear, or was it relief that the secret was finally out in the open? "Jackson," Rosemary whispered, "please, let me explain." "No need." Jackson held up a hand, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. "I know everything. Safeguard technologies, the patents, the investor meetings next week, the $26,000, all of it." Tom's jaw dropped. "How did you?" "I'm a private investigator, Tom. It's literally what I do for a living." Jackson looked past them at the people seated around the table. 2 women and 3 men, all dressed professionally, all watching this family drama unfold with uncomfortable expressions. "I'm guessing these are your engineers and the product designer Patricia Kim recommended?" Rosemary's eyes filled with tears. "You hacked my laptop. You lied to me for 6 months." The words came out harder than Jackson intended. "You used my ideas to build a company and didn't tell me. You emptied our savings. You made me think." His voice cracked. He couldn't finish that sentence, not in front of strangers. "I know what you thought." Rosemary's voice broke. "And I am so, so sorry. I never wanted you to feel that way. Never." "Then why?" Jackson demanded. "Why go behind my back? Why not just ask me to be part of this?" "Because you would have said no." Rosemary's tears spilled over. "You would have listed every reason it could fail, every way we could lose money, every risk we couldn't afford. Just like you've done every single time I've wanted to take a chance on something for the past 3 years. The truth of her words hit Jackson like a physical blow, because she was absolutely right. After what happened to your dad's business, you became terrified of failure, Rosemary continued, her voice shaking. And after the Caldwell case, you became convinced that you weren't good enough, that your ideas weren't good enough, that trying and failing was worse than never trying at all. That case almost destroyed a family. You made a mistake, Rosemary interrupted. One mistake in 13 years of brilliant work. But you couldn't forgive yourself. You shut down. You stopped dreaming. You stopped believing in yourself. She wiped her tears roughly. So yes, I lied to you. I went behind your back. Because I couldn't watch you give up on everything anymore. I couldn't watch you settle for investigating cheating spouses when you're capable of so much more. If you're enjoying this story so far, pause and comment, "I am enjoying this story," below. Jackson stood there, absorbing her words. Behind him, the elevator dinged. More footsteps in the hallway. but he couldn't tear his attention away from Rosemary's tear-stained face. These ideas, Rosemary gestured at the prototype on the table, they're brilliant. They could save lives. They could revolutionize home security. And they came from your mind, Jackson, your experience, your vision. But you would never do anything with them because you were too afraid. So you decided to steal them? Jackson couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. I decided to prove to you that they were worth fighting for. Rosemary took a step closer. I thought if I could get the company off the ground, secure funding, show you it was real and possible, then you'd finally see what I see. That failure didn't break you. It made you better, smarter, more careful. And those qualities, combined with your vision, could create something amazing. Tom cleared his throat. Jackson, I know you're angry at both of us. You have every right to be. But Rosemary did this out of love. Everything she's done these past 6 months has been about showing you that you're not the failure you think you are. Jackson looked at his brother. You risked your marriage to Rachel for this. Did she know? She knew. Tom's expression was pained. She thought I was crazy, but she supported it. Because she's seen how much you've struggled since the Caldwell case too. We all have. The woman Jackson hadn't recognized as Patricia Kim stood up from the table. Mr. Pope, I apologize for the intrusion. This is clearly a family matter. We can reconvene another time. No. The word came out of Jackson's mouth before he'd consciously decided to say it. Everyone turned to look at him. No, don't leave. I want to see it. Rosemary's eyes widened. Jackson? The prototype. The presentation you were giving when I arrived. I want to see all of it. Jackson walked past Rosemary and Tom into the apartment, his heart pounding. You based it on my ideas. The least you can do is show me what you built. Rosemary and Tom exchanged uncertain glances. Then Rosemary nodded slowly and led Jackson to the conference table. For the next hour, Jackson sat and listened as his wife explained every detail of Safeguard Technologies. The AI that learned a home's normal patterns and could detect anomalies. The integration with smart locks and cameras. The predictive algorithms that could identify potential threats before they became actual break-ins. The affordable price point that would make it accessible to average families, not just the wealthy. It was everything Jackson had dreamed about. And it was better than he'd imagined, because Rosemary had refined his ideas with her marketing genius, and Tom had implemented them with elegant code. The 5 team members chimed in with their contributions. Sarah, the lead engineer, had solved the processing power problem Jackson had always thought was insurmountable. David, the product designer, had created an interface so intuitive that a child could use it. The others had handled manufacturing partnerships, quality testing, and regulatory compliance. They'd thought of everything. Every objection Jackson would have raised, they'd already addressed. Every risk he would have cited, they'd already mitigated. When the presentation ended, Jackson sat back in his chair stunned. The investor meetings next week. Who are they? Horizon Ventures, Techstars, and Sequoia Capital, Rosemary said quietly. Patricia has personal relationships with partners at all 3 firms. They've agreed to consider us because of her recommendation and our patent portfolio. But it's still a long shot. What are you asking for? $5 million for 30% equity, enough to scale manufacturing and marketing for a nationwide launch within 18 months. $5 million. It seemed impossible. And yet, looking at the prototype humming on the table, seeing the passion in his wife's eyes, Jackson realized it wasn't impossible at all. Your pitch needs work, he said. Rosemary's face fell. What? You're focusing too much on the technology and not enough on the human impact. Jackson stood and walked to the whiteboard mounted on the wall. He picked up a marker. Let me show you what I mean. For the next 2 hours, Jackson did what he'd never thought he'd do again. He dreamed. He drew diagrams on the whiteboard, explaining use cases from his 13 years of investigating break-ins, home invasions, and security failures. He described the families he'd seen devastated by crimes that could have been prevented. He outlined a narrative structure for the pitch that would make investors feel the urgency of the problem Safeguard was solving. The team listened, taking notes. Rosemary watched him with tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Tom gripped Jackson's shoulder at one point, his own eyes suspiciously bright. When Jackson finally set down the marker, the whiteboard was covered with notes and diagrams. His throat was dry, his hand was cramping, and he felt more alive than he had in months. "That's how you sell it," he said. "Not as a product, as a mission." Patricia Kim was nodding. "Mr. Pope, you clearly have expertise these investor presentations need. Would you consider joining the team, at least for the pitch meetings?" Jackson turned to Rosemary. "Is that what you wanted, for me to join?" "I wanted you to believe in yourself again," Rosemary said softly. "Everything else was just means to that end." Jackson looked around the apartment, at the prototypes on the table, at Tom and the team members who'd spent months building something from his ideas, at his wife, who'd risked their marriage and their savings to prove a point about his worth. She'd lied to him, deceived him, gone behind his back in ways that still hurt to think about, but she'd also believed in him when he'd stopped believing in himself. "I have conditions," Jackson said finally. Rosemary straightened. "Anything. First, no more lies, ever, about anything. If we're doing this together, we're partners in every sense. Equal partners." "Agreed." "Second, we tell the investors the truth about how this company started, that it began with my ideas, but only came to life because of your courage to act on them. They need to see us as a team." Rosemary nodded, tears spilling over again. "Yes, absolutely yes." "Third," Jackson paused, "we go to counseling, both of us, because 6 months of lies did damage, Rosemary. And I need to understand why you felt you couldn't trust me with this, why you thought I needed to be protected from my own dreams." "I'll make the appointment tomorrow," Rosemary whispered. Jackson walked to the prototype and picked it up. The device was solid and well built. It looked professional, real. He turned it over in his hands, examining the careful engineering. "The casing needs to be more weather-resistant if we want outdoor installation options," he said. "And the motion sensors should have adjustable sensitivity zones. Some customers will want to ignore pets or small animals." Sarah, the engineer, leaned forward eagerly. "I was thinking the same thing. If we adjust the algorithm parameters." And just like that, Jackson found himself deep in a technical discussion about his own security system. His dream, finally coming to life. Tom pulled Rosemary aside while the others talked. Jackson couldn't hear what his brother said, but he saw Rosemary nod, saw her reach up to hug Tom tightly. An hour later, the team packed up to leave. Patricia Kim shook Jackson's hand firmly. "I'll add your name to the company registration forms. Equal partner with Rosemary and Tom?" Jackson looked at Rosemary. She nodded enthusiastically. "Equal partners," Jackson agreed. When everyone else had gone, Jackson and Rosemary stood alone in the apartment. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 6 months of secrets and 1 night of truth. "I'm still angry," Jackson said quietly. "I'm still hurt that you didn't trust me enough to include me from the beginning." "I know." Rosemary's voice was small. "I'm so sorry, Jackson. I thought I was helping, but I can see now that I made everything worse." "You also made something incredible." Jackson gestured at the prototype on the table. "You took ideas I'd given up on and made them real. You believed in them when I didn't. And yeah, the way you did it was wrong. But the fact that you did it at all." He trailed off, not sure how to finish that thought. Rosemary moved closer, tentative. "Can you forgive me? Eventually?" Jackson thought about the past 6 months, the suspicion, the pain, the night he'd followed her, convinced his marriage was ending, the moment he'd seen Tom walk into this building and felt his entire world shatter. But he also thought about what he'd learned tonight, that his wife loved him enough to risk everything, that his ideas had value, that failure didn't have to be the end of the story. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Ask me again after we get through the investor meetings, after we see a counselor, after we figure out how to be partners in both marriage and business without destroying each other." "That's fair," Rosemary wiped her eyes. "For what it's worth, I never stopped loving you, not for a single second of these 6 months." "I know." And Jackson did know. That had never been the question. The question was whether love was enough when trust had been broken. They drove home in separate cars. Jackson needed the space to think, to process everything that had happened. When he pulled into their driveway, Rosemary was already inside. He found her in the kitchen making tea, their normal routine, except nothing felt normal anymore. "The guest room is made up if you want space," Rosemary offered quietly. Jackson considered it, then shook his head. "No, we sleep in the same bed. We're married. We're going to figure this out." Relief flooded Rosemary's face. "Okay." That night, lying in the darkness next to his wife, Jackson stared at the ceiling and thought about how close he'd come to losing everything. How his fear of failure had nearly cost him his marriage and his dreams. "Rosemary," he whispered. "Yeah? Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't." He felt her hand find his in the darkness. "Always, Jackson. Always." The investor meetings the following week were brutal. 3 back-to-back presentations, each lasting 2 hours. Jackson's law enforcement contacts and case studies provided the emotional weight Rosemary's marketing expertise needed. Tom's technical demonstrations proved the technology worked. Together, they were convincing. Horizon Ventures passed. They wanted more market research. Techstars offered $3 million for 40%. Not enough money, too much equity. Sequoia Capital made them wait 5 agonizing days before calling with their answer. Jackson was investigating a routine insurance fraud case when his phone rang. Rosemary's name on the screen. "They said yes," she screamed the moment he answered. $5 million, 30%. They said yes. Jackson sat down hard in his surveillance van, his hands shaking. "They said yes?" "They said your pitch about preventing another Caldwell case was the most compelling founder story they'd heard all year. They said we're invested, not just in the technology, but in the mission. Jackson, we did it. We actually did it." 6 months later, Jackson stood in the Safeguard Technologies office, a renovated warehouse space they'd leased with funding money. The walls were lined with engineering stations. Sarah and her team were testing version 2.0 of the prototype. David was designing packaging. Rosemary was on a call with a retail distributor about placement in home security sections. Tom walked up beside Jackson, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You okay? You look lost in thought." "Just thinking about how different this year could have gone," Jackson admitted. "If I hadn't found out about the company, if I'd never confronted Rosemary." "You'd have found out eventually," Tom said. "Rosemary was planning to tell you after the investor meetings no matter what happened." "I know," Jackson took the coffee. "I just wonder sometimes if there was a better way. If all the lies and pain were really necessary." "Probably not," Tom said honestly. "But we're human. We mess up. We take the long way around when there are shortcuts. The important thing is we got here." Jackson nodded. On his desk was a photo from their counseling session last month. The therapist had asked them to bring in an image that represented their marriage. Rosemary had chosen a picture of them rock climbing on their honeymoon. Jackson roped to Rosemary, trusting her to belay him as he reached for a hold he wasn't sure he could catch. The therapist had asked what the photo meant to him. "It means sometimes you have to let go and trust your partner to catch you," Jackson had said, "even when you're terrified of falling." They'd both cried during that session, but they'd also made progress. Learning to communicate honestly, learning to trust again, learning that love required both vulnerability and courage. Rosemary finished her call and walked over, slipping her hand into Jackson's. "You ready for the launch party planning meeting? Patricia wants to invite everyone who helped get us here." "Everyone?" Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Well, maybe not the investors who passed on us." Rosemary grinned. "But definitely Sarah, David, the team, family, friends." She paused. "And I was thinking we should invite some families you've helped over the years, people who could have used Safeguard. Show them what we're building." Jackson felt a familiar tightness in his chest. The Caldwell family appeared in his mind, the little girl whose life he'd accidentally disrupted. "Hey," Rosemary squeezed his hand, reading his expression like she always could. "That case doesn't define you. This does. Every family we help protect with Safeguard is proof that your mistake led to something good. That's not erasure, that's redemption. When did you get so wise? Jackson asked. I married a brilliant man who taught me that every problem has a solution if you're willing to investigate deeply enough. Rosemary smiled. Even relationship problems. Tom groaned. Are you two going to be disgustingly cute now that you've worked through your issues? Absolutely, Rosemary and Jackson said in unison. 3 months later, Safeguard launched nationwide. The response was overwhelming. Within the first week, they'd sold out their initial inventory. Pre-orders flooded in. Tech reviewers praised the intuitive interface and powerful features. Most importantly, Jackson started receiving emails from families whose homes had been protected by the system. Break-ins prevented. Potential threats identified and reported to police before they became crimes. Every email felt like absolution, like proof that his vision had been worth fighting for all along. One evening, Jackson came home to find Rosemary in their living room, surrounded by thank you letters from Safeguard customers. She was crying, but smiling. Look at this one, she said, holding up a letter. A single mom in Detroit. She wrote that Safeguard alerted her to someone trying to break into her back door while she was putting her kids to bed. Police arrived in time to arrest the intruder. She said our system saved her family. Jackson sat beside Rosemary, reading the letter over her shoulder. We did that. Together. Together, Rosemary agreed. She leaned against him. I'm sorry it took lies and pain to get us here, but I'm not sorry about where we ended up. Jackson wrapped his arm around his wife. Neither am I. On the coffee table, the original Safeguard prototype sat like a sculpture. They'd kept it as a reminder, not of the lies that had built the company, but of what was possible when people who loved each other refused to give up, on their dreams, on each other, on the belief that failure was just another word for not trying again. Jackson's phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Mr. Pope, you don't know me, but Safeguard just prevented someone from breaking into my elderly mother's house. The police caught him. I wanted you to know your system saved her. Thank you for not giving up on this idea. Jackson showed the text to Rosemary. She read it and smiled through fresh tears. See, she whispered, this is what happens when you let yourself dream again. Jackson pulled her closer and thought about how right she was. How a year ago, he'd been broken and scared, convinced that his one mistake defined him forever. And now he was sitting in his living room with the woman he loved, reading thank you letters from people whose lives had been changed by an idea he'd almost given up on. The road to get here had been messy, painful, complicated, but it had been worth every difficult step. I love you, he told Rosemary. Even when I was angry, even when I thought I'd lost you, I never stopped loving you. I know, Rosemary said. That's what made the lying so hard. I could see how much I was hurting you, but I couldn't figure out how to stop without destroying what I was trying to build. It was impossible and awful, and I'm so grateful you gave me a chance to explain. I'm grateful you gave me a reason to dream again, Jackson replied. They sat there in comfortable silence as the sun set outside their window. Two people who'd almost lost everything, but had instead found something better than they'd imagined. Not perfection, but partnership. Not a marriage without scars, but a marriage that had survived the wounds and grown stronger for it. Outside, a safeguard system protected their home. Inside, they protected each other. And that, Jackson thought, was the whole point of everything they'd built together. Security didn't come from technology or money or success. It came from trusting someone enough to be vulnerable with them, from loving someone enough to forgive their mistakes, from believing someone enough to let them catch you when you were afraid to leap. Rosemary had taken that leap first, 6 months ago, when she decided to build his dream without his permission. It had been the wrong way to do it, but it had also been the only way she'd known how to save him from his own fear. Now it was Jackson's turn to leap, to trust that what they'd built together, both the company and their marriage, was strong enough to last. He looked at his wife, tears still streaming down her face as she read another thank you letter, and he knew with absolute certainty that they were going to be okay. Better than okay. They were going to change the world together. one protected home at a time.